And welcome back to our election coverage here at ClarkCountyToday.com. We are just around the corner from the general election on November 6th. And just a reminder, go do your civic duty, get out there and vote. Today we're sitting down with Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler, who's running for the 3rd Congressional District, running once again. What, your fourth? This would be your fourth?
This would be my fifth.
Fifth term. Okay, I can't keep track these days.
Goes
it's a
quick.
two-year
Two-year
term,
terms,
so they go quickly. So I was watching, New York Times had a fascinating real-time poll. I don't know if you sat and watched that, where you could see, like, as they called and as they talked to people. So they just finished 500 and some respondents. I believe it finished with you at 48%, your opponent Carolyn Long at 41%, and 11% undecided. A pretty high undecided number. That's close to within the margin of error. So this is one of those races that the pundits have put in that category of a kind of a toss-up. Are you surprised it's been this close?
No, I'm not. This seat, I've never assumed is my seat. I've never assumed it's a hardcore Republican seat. It's actually, if you look throughout history, it's a pretty independent-minded seat. In fact, I'm only the second Republican to have this seat in the last 60 years. And the first one was Linda Smith, who I actually got to help campaign for when I was in high school. So it's a pretty, I've always felt it is an honor and a privilege to get to have this seat. I grew up here. And that poll didn't surprise me. I mean, that showed us with about a 7-point lead, which is about what we're tracking. You know, you don't always break above 50% in polls. It's just kind of how it goes in the lead up. And what we saw with the people who were undecided, a number of them lean towards Republican answers on other parts of the poll, which I think is about where people are. You know, folks in this district are, you know, I said it's not a hardcore Republican district. I would argue it's definitely right of center, right? People expect liberty and freedom to raise their families, grow their business, what have you. And so, you know, when that kind of that liberal agenda comes in, which is what's happening right now, we're seeing kind of that liberal push. Bloomberg's put money in, Emily's List, all these folks, they're trying to move us in a liberal direction. And I don't think this district's going to buy that.
Let me ask you, one of the biggest criticisms that your opponent has lobbed at you has been the failure to do a lot of town halls. She's talked about, I'll be the representative who's on the ground here in the district. Can you just respond to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, I've done almost 80 town halls. Most of them are in person. In fact, a vast majority of them. And I've done them in every corner of this district, and I'll continue to do those. I have in recent months used a lot of telephone town halls, and I love this technology. It's actually amazing because this district is 7 or 7.5 hours. It can take you a long time to go end to end, right? To get to the smaller areas. You know, there's a big population center here in Clark County, but most of the rest of the district's pretty rural. So you can be in the living room with a grandmother from Morton at the same time that you're in Seaview, right, with a retired couple, the same time you're in Goldendale with a young mom. And what I continue to hear from people is thank you. Thank you for making yourself available. It's the 21st century. Use technology, do whatever you can to facilitate that conversation. You know, my opponent's got a different take on this. Part of the reason she's not been holding town halls. Town halls are nonpartisan. It's where you have generally people come to my in-person town halls are people who disagree with me. That's generally what they are. And they're great. That's a forum for democracy. What she's been holding are political rallies where she campaigns, she asks for volunteers, then she solicits campaign contributions. And so I think it's been, you know, important for her. She just moved into this area from Oregon to get to know the district, and I think that's why she's been doing these rallies all over the place. But I didn't have to get to know this district this year. This is my home. This is where I'm raising my kids. This is where my family is. It's where my folks raised me. And my goal is to facilitate that communication and to get results for the people I serve.
I want to take a moment to mention to the viewers, too, we did reach out to Carolyn Long and offer her the opportunity to do an interview like you're doing. They declined, citing that she was too busy at this point. So I want to make that clear that we did make that offer. Her campaign has also made some allegations about a TV ad that's been running. I know you're not directly responsible for that ad, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to some of the allegations made in that ad.
This is what voters should be paying attention to. So for months in this campaign, she's gone around this district saying, Things like she would repeal the entire tax bill. She would, quote, repurpose the $2,300 a family. The average family in Southwest Washington is keeping $2,300 more of their money in their pocket as a result of the bill that I helped pass. She's been going around this district campaigning about how she hates it, how she would repeal it, and how she would want that money to come back to DC so she could, quote, repurpose it, right? Well, now I'm holding her feet to the fire. I've read her, in fact, I've got several of her quotes here. She told the Columbian Ed Board, "I would not have voted for that bill. If I could, I would repeal it." She said it again, so she said to KXRW radio, "So I hate the entire bill. I'd like to throw it all out." I have too many quotes to read. But now that we're bringing that up and saying, hey, you know what that means? That means that you're raising taxes on the average family by $2,300. It means you're raising taxes on the average single mom by 70%. In fact, you're raising taxes on 90% of Southwest Washington by saying you'd repeal that. She doesn't like it. Now, this ad in question isn't my ad. I don't have control over it. But I find it telling that now that we're holding her quotes up against I'm doing it in interviews like this. Her quotes up against what she's now saying. We have to ask where the real Carolyn Long stands on this, because this is a huge issue for the people here. This is huge to our economy. You know, when I started this office I was elected in 2010, and in 2011 held my first jobs fair down at the Red Lion at the Key, which is no longer there. It's gone. But I will never forget that the 1,800 people came to that jobs fair trying to get a job. Our unemployment in this county was 13.5%. It was almost 19% in other parts of this district. And fast forward to today, we're at about 4%, 4.5%. In Cowlitz County, we're at 3.9%. And those other areas of the district, they've seen similar drops in unemployment. And we're seeing this across across gender, across race and ethnic minority. We're seeing at or near record lows for people of color, minorities, women, with regard to unemployment. And that's because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs bill that we passed, that the president signed, and she wants to undo it. I just find it telling that now that people are paying attention and they're voting and they're saying, wait, you want to raise my taxes? She's backing away from some of those statements.
Well, there is a claim made in the ad that 4 million jobs have been created because of the tax bill. I believe the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts the number more at like 1.3 million. Mm-hmm. Can you respond to that? I mean,
well, again, it's not my ad, right? So I can't respond to that. I have seen the 4 million number. I've seen several different numbers from pretty reputable sources, everything from the Wall Street Journal to different studies from universities. So here's the point. You know what she's squabbling about? How many millions of jobs were created, right? Under the last administration and under Speaker Pelosi, we were almost flatlined as an economy, right? We were at 2% growth. Wages were stagnant. No one was getting bonuses or raises. And today, one thing is clear. We're at record unemployment. In August, there were 650,000 more jobs than there were actual workers in the United States. So my opponent has said, I think it's telling. She literally is squabbling about how many millions of jobs were created. Well, at least she's admitting that millions of jobs were created as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the one that she wants to repeal, the one that I'm going to fight to maintain.
Since you're talking about jobs, let's continue on that topic for a second, because I did want to ask you about this area. I looked at your website, and you do talk about job creation. You also talk about sort of balancing the need for job growth here in especially Clark County. I know your district covers much more than Clark County, but Clark County is sort of on that bleeding edge of that growth. I think this sort of coming over from the cost of living in Portland, but that's raising another huge issue among folks about how do you balance creating jobs with also having those natural areas and those natural resources that we love here. Talk a little bit about what you would do to try and find that balance. How do you create jobs and keep natural areas?
Oh, our economy and our environment are not mutually exclusive. One of the things that drives me nuts about this elitist mentality of, and it's really a faith, those people who, I want to sustain and protect our environment. I grew up here. I want my kids to know what's special about swimming and fishing in the Lewis River or Battleground Lake or climbing Mount St. Helens. These are all things that I experienced as a kid here, and I want my kids to experience that, right? But these elitists take this perspective that we're resource poor. And we shouldn't cut down a tree. We shouldn't harvest shellfish, right? We shouldn't utilize these resources. Well, what science has shown us over the last number of years, take forestry as an example, in the last 30 years, when the spotted owl controversy came in and our federal forests were kind of locked down, right? What we have seen, the owl has declined still at 3% at least per year, and we're still seeing other species. I think there's about 40 other species on the verge of extinction. Why? Because we're not managing the forest either. It's decaying, it's burning. In fact, all the fires in California last year emitted more pollution than every car and truck on the road in California last year. So we're seeing the opposite effect by not managing for a healthy forest. The forests are decaying and the families who depend on those forests. So what we know now is if we go in, and I've had a number of policies to push our forests here locally to actively harvest, and I'm not saying clear cut the whole forest, I'm just saying under current law, go in and harvest in those selected areas, which creates a diversity, right, of different types of trees. You have some clear space, you have old growth, you have different age classes. That's what science shows us now, that that's what's best for the animals, it's best for the elk, it's best for the clear streams and rivers, and it's best for the families. And that's what's most important to me, is that endangered American taxpayer, right? I have a lot of small communities whose subsistence depends on the health of a forest, and to watch our federal forests fall into disrepair is really hard for them to take. So I think making sure our federal forests, our federal lands, one of the ways we protect them is we make sure that we actively manage them. And you can have the outcome of protecting the forest, keeping it there for generations, but also having Skamania, Klickitat, I think of Pacific County, Lewis County, they all are timber dependent communities, and the schools are timber dependent, right? The tax receipts that come off of those. So we can do right by both pieces. And it's really only those extreme environmentalists who more adhere to it as a faith and refuse to look at the science that are pushing us in this direction of, don't touch the resource, you can't use it, we all have to live in one tiny little bubble and think George Jetson, but in a tiny little area. I reject that. That's a poverty mentality, right? We are not resource poor, and we don't have to live that way, especially with 21st century technology. Let's
move on to another issue that's closely related to the economy and job growth and people moving here, transportation.
Yep.
You have talked a lot about Oregon's plan to toll parts of I-5 and I-205. We obviously have the Interstate Bridge Project, was a huge project, but also a huge priority, and I think will be at this next legislative session for both the governor and the legislature to tackle that and sit down with Oregon and come back to the table. So just talk a little bit about what tools you think you might have in Congress to affect what Oregon is hoping to do, or is there anything you can do?
So, well, this is a critical issue for our region. It's critical for our economy. It's critical for our way of life. Wasting time in traffic is time spent away from your loved ones, never mind the impact on the environment and the impact on the economy. It doesn't need to happen. It really doesn't. Some of the crisis, I think, is you get into some of how some of the Portland City Council and folks in Portland look at it, is their goal isn't to increase the throughput, it's to constrict it even further so less people come through. And I think that's a 20th century mentality. Right now their plan doesn't have anything to do with making the bridge safer or helping people get through it more quickly. It has to do with charging them money to use elsewhere in the state. So the plan that Oregon has right now that passed their legislature would put a toll on I-5 and I-205. Very reasonable people in Clark County who cross that bridge say, well, maybe I'd be willing to pay a toll if it meant I was getting to work sooner. That's not what this is. This is literally setting up a piggy bank whereby when you cross that bridge, Oregon will toll you, put that money into their general fund, and they'll either just use it to sustain the tolling system or they'll use it elsewhere in other projects in the state. Zero commitment to improve the bridge or the traffic or the throughput. It's just a punitive toll. What I keep telling people is, irrespective of what you think the I-5 bridge solution should look like, universally you should reject this toll proposal because it is nothing but a money grab. money grab into the wallets of people who can't vote these people out. I mean, it literally is a taxation without representation issue, which is why in the last year, and I had this all the way up until the omnibus, I passed an amendment on the House side that would have put a moratorium on anybody's plans to put a toll on I-5 and 205. It literally was just a pause button that said you can't move forward, with my goal being until we get more agreement, until we get our governor to step in, right, and go a little bit more toe-to-toe with Oregon. Got it through the House, passed the amendment, it was in, and it was not supported by Patty Murray, or Maria Cantwell, but Patty Murray's on the appropriation side, and it came out of the omnibus bill. In fact, I talked to the to the senator who was negotiating it, and she said, well, your senior senator doesn't want it. And I couldn't, at that point I was trying to do everything I could to get a meeting with Patty Murray just to say, hey, come be our hero, be our champion. We need your help here. And all we got was silence. So that was my first attempt. I now have another bill that I'm working that would require both Oregon and Washington governors to sign off on any tolling plan that was put in between our two states. And that just would require compromise, period. That would just say nobody has the hand up on anybody. It has to be something that's mutually beneficial. Now, fast forward. If we're able to defeat this, which is going to be a very difficult road. I feel like right now I look around and I'm like, where's the backup here on this? And I feel like I'm one of the only people out there banging the drum. Like, this is unfair. This will not fix our bridge. This will not make your commute better. This is just a money grab. The next piece is if you really do want to fix it, once Oregon puts this money elsewhere, I don't know why we think out of the goodness of their heart they'd all of a sudden then put that into an I-5 bridge fix down the road. And I think that's where some of our local officials here are hoping. You know, they're not as strong opposing Oregon's plan here, and I think that they're hoping maybe to get on the bandwagon and maybe massage it a little bit and have them redirect some of that money to an I-5 bridge fix. I just think, maybe I'm just too skeptical. I just don't trust that once they have that money to spend how they want to spend it, they're going to, out of the goodness of their heart, redirect to fix our traffic problem. You know, fast forward. So say we get this hurdle, we deal with it, or Oregon drops this plan. Now we're looking at how we fix this bridge. I've more looked at it as a framework. My job as the federal representative is to help bring funding for this bridge. I-5 is an interstate highway, connects Canada to Mexico. This is not a Clark County bridge. This is a bridge that spans the entire West Coast. And so I feel like the feds have a responsibility to fund the lion's share of this bridge, which is why I helped put $1.5 billion into the Rebuilding America's Infrastructure Fund, which is a grant that it's a pool of money that you can make an application to and receive that money for projects just like a bridge fix, a regionally significant bridge fix. There's another pot of money I helped support getting another $1.5 billion into called the BUILD program. And so as an appropriator, my goal has been, let's make sure there are pots of money available so that when the plan comes forward and they make an application, there is federal dollars available. But again, you know, the thing I'm watching for is to make sure that it meets our needs. You know, Oregon and some of the higher ups here pushed a bridge not too long ago that wouldn't have met our needs, that on the day that it opened would have been at capacity, and it would have cost about $3.5 billion, which is why when people have said, we're going to start up the CRC process again, I keep saying that failed for a reason, because it didn't meet the needs of people in Clark County. And I will oppose any project that attempts to ram a light rail down our throats or that attempts to make us conform to what Portland's notion of this is. This needs to be a compromise. That's one of the reasons I put forward the idea, you know, a compromise instead of a light rail if you have to have a mass transit piece, because they're looking at it in terms of, I think they just want light rail, but they're saying, well, we won't get as much money unless we have a mass transit
federal
component.
Funding is what they're using to... There's
different pots of money. If they don't apply for the mass transit funding, they won't get the mass transit funding, but that doesn't preclude them from applying for a bigger highway fund. It's all semantics. It's how they're saying it that way, I think, to try and guilt us into having this mass transit component. Okay, if we agree to a mass transit component, the one thing I keep saying is we've said no to light rail. You know, bus rapid transit could fill the same federal requirements. You could still pull down that federal money for that without attaching us in this county that's still growing to a fixed rail system. You know, Kate Brown and the Portland City Council keep saying they're going to do it the way they're going to do it. I keep saying that's not going to happen on our watch.
Of course, we may end up with a new governor over there next week anyway.
From
so
your mouth to God's ears.
who knows? Who knows where that could go? Let's move on to healthcare, another big issue that you've talked a lot about, and probably one of the biggest difference areas between you and your opponent. Talk a little bit about your view on. I know you voted against the healthcare or the Obamacare repeal bill that came forward. Just recap again a little bit the reason for your vote there, and then let's talk a little bit about how you would like to fix the issue, because it is a major issue. I think pretty much everybody in this room
has to be fixed.
Has probably dealt with the rising cost of health insurance.
So there's no question in my mind that Obamacare has not worked, it has failed, and it needs to be replaced. That's been pretty clear, really, almost since inception, but certainly in the last number of years, I could point to failings in every single county in my district where all the insurers pulled out, right? And so I had this one county where literally there was no insurer in the individual market, meaning they couldn't go somewhere else and get insurance because they wouldn't get the subsidy, but then they just were literally forced to pay the fine because there was no insurance available in the exchange. We had to go in and demand that the insurance commissioner fix this at the 11th hour. At another county where the insurance company, under the approval of the insurance commissioner, changed it to where people couldn't cross the bridge in Seaview and go into Astoria and get care, which is 25 minutes. And we're going to be forced to drive all the way into Longview, which is several hours, to get the exact same care they had before. We had to go in again and demand it be fixed. And fortunately, the insurance commissioner saw the light and the company reversed itself. But those are just examples. Here in Clark County, some of the largest primary care clinics are no longer taking folks off the Medicaid exchange because it's not paying enough. Pediatricians' offices here in Vancouver are not able to take more of these kids because it doesn't pay enough. Now, having said that, in the same time that Obamacare has been the law of the land, insurance companies have made more profit. They have made record profit. Record. Yet our premiums have gone up by double digits, right? And our deductibles have gone through the roof. I mean, for some people, their deductibles are upwards of $13,000. So yeah, they have insurance, but it doesn't mean they can go in and get something for their sore throat or get stitches. It's easier to just pay out of pocket than try and engage with a deductible that high. So it's clearly failed. My concern was the bill that was put together was done very hastily, and it didn't do what we had promised. And there is a reason for it. So the Senate was controlled by barely a majority, and so they didn't believe a full Obamacare repeal would go through and be filibuster-proof, essentially. And so they had to fit it into this vehicle called reconciliation. And I know this sounds wonky, but this is the U.S. Senate, right? So they couldn't put, they had to, in that bill, the only things that could be in there had to be directly related to the budget. So healthcare policy like purchase of health insurance across state lines, expanding use of association health plans, those things that are free market solutions that we know are what are going to bring down insurance premiums were not able to be included in the bill. So that was my first challenge was, okay, so we're going to pass this, but it's not going to lower rates, which is what we've been promising. And then secondly, the way it handled the Medicaid population. I believe that those people who are able-bodied, childless adults who are on Medicaid is welfare. It's the thing that we pay taxes for because we don't want to see poor children or disabled folks or vulnerable seniors. We don't want to see them on the streets. We want them to have access to care, which is why we pay taxes for that welfare system. The way it handled the change would have, I believe, endangered that specific vulnerable population. Those people that welfare program was designed to help. Now, I'm all for getting the people off that shouldn't have been there, but we need to make sure that they have a place to go, which again is why the purchase of health insurance across state lines and association health plans is so critical to the whole replace, because you're getting them off, but you're not necessarily leaving them high and dry. You're getting those folks where they should be, and also maintaining the welfare safety net for those people who we as a society feel like should be covered. So it's not that the concept of the replace I had a heart change on. My heart is to get everybody access to affordable health care, right, and quality health care. But the bill that we put forward, I think, and this is what I told the president, it didn't keep the promise that he made and that I made. which is why I couldn't support it. And he didn't fight me on that. I think because he, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's hard not to recognize that when you look at the whole bill.
You obviously will have some new leadership in the House after Speaker Ryan steps aside. Do you feel like there will be the wherewithal to get something done, something that you can support?
I'm going to fight to that end. It's so hard to know who's going to do what and what I think the president is really going to set a lot of the agenda in the next 2 years, with the bully pulpit, with where he wants to move. But for my part, my responsibility is to fight to make sure that we fix this healthcare system. And I think it's worth noting that I haven't just walked away from it, even though we didn't get the replace bill that I have been fighting for. I have helped make advancements on association health plans, helped protect over 500,000 of them in this state. In the president's administration, we worked hand in glove to get that done. I've been working on a maternal mortality bill and on a kids' Medicaid bill that helps those kids get 21st century care and not be bound to stay in Washington State, but they can go where the centers are. Right now, if you're on Medicaid, you're landlocked. So even sometimes crossing the river to go to OHSU may not be covered. That's ridiculous to me, especially for Southwest Washington families. So we've made progress in a number of those areas, and we're going to keep moving forward. This is another area where I think the president's right on, is with regard to prescription drug coverage. It's so funny to me because my opponent keeps saying, we need to fix healthcare, and I'm like, Obamacare is the law of the land. You like it, and you want to double down on it. I agree, we need to fix it, we need to get rid of this. Under Obamacare's watch, prescription drug prices have continued to soar, which is why, one of the things the president signed, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, has to do with drug pricing transparency. So when you go into a pharmacy, right under, previous to him moving this, and previous to Congress passing legislation here, your pharmacist by law couldn't tell you, hey, it's cheaper just to buy this cash than it is to pay your copay and go through your insurance company. Significantly cheaper. They were precluded by law from telling you that. It's basically a gag order. Well, the president has signed into effect reversing that, and I've actually co-sponsored legislation that would allow the safe importation of drugs from Canada. There's no reason we should be paying almost $1,000 more for the same medication that our Canadian neighbors to the north are paying. And so I think breaking up some of that system needs to happen, and I think the president has taken some good steps here. In the House this last summer, we also passed a bill to break down the insurance company antitrust exemption. I don't know if you know this, but some of the only companies in the United States who are allowed to have legal monopolies are insurance companies. It's not a free market, right? That's why I think costs continue to rise. We did a repeal bill out of the House this summer. To break up that antitrust exemption. And so those are the types of reforms that have to happen if we're going to see healthcare truly come down. So we have to repeal and replace Obamacare, but it's not the only thing we can be doing, and I've been focusing in the meantime, doing everything we can to lower the cost and get access. I believe everyone in this country does deserve access. How we get everyone access, though, is the key. We don't need to bankrupt the system that we have, right, in order to get those folks access. And this is one of the areas where I differ with my opponent. Again, this is something she's walking back, but I could read you the quotes. She said at least 3 times, most recently in June, she told the Longview Daily News, it says, quote, Long said she would vote for a so-called Medicare for All bill if Democrats win back control of Congress or the House. But she said that chance of such a bill passing Congress would be nil. She told the Washington State Indivisible podcast, the gentleman asked her, with your incremental approach, do you ever see yourself supporting a Medicare for All type health care program? And she said, absolutely, absolutely. And now she's walking that back, saying she never said that. But the reality is a Medicare for All program will bankrupt Medicare as we know it. So if you're on Medicare and you like it, you can kiss it goodbye. It would outlaw all private insurance. So if you get it through your union, if you get it through your company, those plans would be outlawed. We would all go into the same government-run system. And that government-run system in the first 10 years would cost $32 trillion. Do you know, we couldn't even pay for that if we doubled every single person's federal income taxes. We couldn't even pay for that first bill, and that's in the first 10 years. You know how they ultimately save money? in single-payer programs is they start to ration care. And for those of us who have family members who have pre-existing conditions, real conditions that will require us to be part of the health system for the rest of our lives, that's who I'm the most worried about. Those are the people who get put in lines and on lists, and they have to wait. And that access to the 21st century care is what begins to decline. So ultimately, I think this is one of the areas where if you want to see healthcare access improve, you want to protect Medicare and Social Security, you're concerned about the federal budget, you absolutely cannot support my opponent, because this is, she said it. I mean, these are her own words. She said she will support it. Here's the other piece. Over 123 congressional Democrats, so some of my current colleagues, have co-sponsored either a Medicare for all or a single-payer health care plan. They've already co-sponsored it, right? That's over half of the Democrat caucus. Add to it people like my opponent who've pledged to support it, and it's a reality. They will absolutely destroy Medicare and bankrupt the system as we know it. So this is a critical election. If you're a healthcare voter, please, please, please dig into what the candidates are saying, what they've done on this issue, because I really think at some point this could be life and death.
We could probably spend another 20 minutes
yeah.
talking about
yes.
that. Because as you're talking, like there's so many questions and comments, but I know we're running out of time. I wanted to move on a little bit. Obviously, one of the big headlines in the news lately has been this Caravan approaching the southern border. The president has said he wants to send 15,000 troops down there to make sure they don't cross. He wants to repeal the birthright citizenship, 14th Amendment. I just wanted to get your thoughts on where that debate is at.
Well, so as someone who is the first Hispanic to represent Washington State federally, you know, I take this issue. I mean, I would take it seriously if I wasn't, but I take it a little bit to heart. I believe immigration is one of the things that's made our country and our democracy and our economy great over the last, really, since our inception. But the key is maintaining a legal immigration system. And when you're talking about 7,000 or more people coming in a caravan, really, you know, my opponent said, well, they're asylum seekers and we need to help them all with asylum. If they were all really asylum seekers, they should be stopping at the U.S. consulate in Mexico, as the Mexican authorities have offered, and started their process of filling out asylum requests. Unfortunately, what I think is happening is there are march organizers who are in there instigating and trying to get this group. I don't know if their plan is just to kind of charge the border or just show up and completely overwhelm the system with the hope of having kind of a public image taking place, ultimately with the end game of having open borders. And look, it makes sense to me if you want to live here. It absolutely makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me are having open borders. It really doesn't. You and I assume, I do, I lock my doors at night, right? People lock their apartments, and it's not because they're racist, right? It's because they want to choose who comes and goes. And that absolutely is the prerogative, not just of this country. Every country, every major country in the world does this. To come in fact, I can't think of one major country that allows you to just run legally across the border in many countries, and I do not advocate this, but in many countries you're taking your life in your hands if you run across that border, right? We've all seen what happens in certain places, and people can lose their life doing that. So I gotta look at this caravan and think, they know that 7,000 people will absolutely overwhelm a port of entry right there on the border, and my thought is, I really hope these march organizers aren't doing this just to prove a political point, because again, my concern is the health and the safety of some of these folks. You know, Doctors Without Borders, who I saw a report, of those caravan folks, participants who they've gotten to see, 2/3 of them have suffered violence, and 1/3 of the women have been sexually assaulted. So this, I think the president is right to say, just like you and I do, when we lock our doors at night, we're going to choose who comes and goes. And if you're eligible for asylum, stop at the Mexican consulate and go through the process and come illegally, be a part of our country. But this illegal kind of mob is to me a very, very dangerous precedent. And I don't believe one of them should be able to enter, because it's about more than just this caravan. It's about making sure we understand and know and agree who comes and goes in and out of this country.
Okay. Let me ask you to sound off on the birthright.
Oh, yes.
Citizenship aspect
You know,
of that, too.
so the 14th Amendment is part of the Constitution, and you know, I do take a very strict, pretty strict conservative view of the Constitution as written. It can't just be overturned. It has to be. There's a process for that, and I don't know if the president is looking at that. I don't know what his lawyers have said to him about his other legal options. I mean, I haven't been in D.C., so that will be part of our conversation when we get back. But as far as I'm concerned, the Constitution is the Constitution. Now, so short of changing it, I don't know how he gets around that. Having said that, he's absolutely right to challenge what is happening, which is, I think, an exploitation of the 14th Amendment. You know, I was reading an article about wealthy Chinese mothers. They have a whole birth tourism industry in China. They come to Saipan, which is part of the Northern Mariana Islands. And the Wall Street Journal did something on this just last year. In 2012, over 10,000 Chinese mothers came to give birth and automatically give their children citizenship. I mean, there's cottage industries that will help you come for 45 days. You don't have to get a visa because it's a territory. They'll come, they'll get hospital care, OB care, they'll pay for it. They'll deliver, their child gets citizenship, and then they take them home. So it's literally a birth tourism industry. And that's not, in my view, the point, right, of what it means to be born an American citizen. I think that's an exploitation of the system, and I think the president's right to say we need to tighten this up. We need to fix the illegal immigration. Ultimately, that's what he's going for. And I think that's not radical. Every country in the world, especially the major countries, and even some of the ones I wouldn't even want to go in, control who comes in and out of their borders.
Well, you can go back and you can find quotes from President Obama, President Clinton.
Yeah, this wasn't a radical concept. Yeah.
Illegal immigration. So
until recently.
I know we've taken more time than we had allotted. I just want to give you a final chance. Anything that we haven't touched on that is top of your mind?
You know, I mentioned, we talked about tolling, which is an important local issue. I didn't mention sea lions. You know, we got that bill, we did the hard work, got that bill out of the House. My hope is that it will move out of the Senate in the next month or two, and then the president can sign it into law. If for some reason the Senate fails to get that and we have to bring this bill back next year, I don't know that we can do it. So Nancy Pelosi, so out of everybody, we got every Democrat in the House and the Senate, or excuse me, in the House in Oregon and Washington to vote yes on that. The two main opponents to that were Nancy Pelosi, she voted no, and Raul Grijalva. Grijalva he's the ranking member of the Resources Committee, but if the House flips, he'll be the chairman. There's no way he lets that bill out of the House. If they're in control, he absolutely hates the bill. So it's critical that we maintain the House, and it's one of the reasons I think, you know, all politics is local. It'll impact us here. It'll impact our economy if we aren't able to maintain this. If my opponent wins, she's pledged to raise your taxes. She's pledged to move us in a single-payer healthcare system, and quite honestly, I'm pretty sure she's not going to be able to overcome Nancy Pelosi when it comes to sea lions as a freshman. So I think this is an incredibly important election, and I ask folks to consider that and consider giving me their vote.
Okay. This is your camera right here. If you want to take a moment to look into that camera and just
Sure.
talk to the voters for just a second.
Yeah. Well, I'm Jaime Herrera Beutler, and I've been privileged to serve you in Congress the last 8 years. I raised my family here. I was raised here, and maintaining our way of life, maintaining the strongest economy we've had in the last 10 years, and really maintaining the growth that we've all seen is a priority to me. If you've enjoyed moving out of high unemployment into low unemployment and seeing the raises and the wages increase and the benefits move forward, then I ask for your vote as we continue to protect this economy and grow it, both for us now and for our children and our grandchildren.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And be sure to go to clarkcountytoday.com. We posted an article talking a little bit about the turnout, but there's also some links there to information about if you haven't gotten your ballot, how you can make sure you get that, what time you should have it in the mail. And again, the election is November 6th, so make sure you get out there and vote.